Hello, my name is Perla Bastiani, and this is our presentation about American Dirt by Janine Cummins. In this novel, we'll be talking about the plot of the novel and the themes in it. We'll be talking about the author's life and the research she made for writing this novel and her reasons for writing the novel. We'll talk about some of the controversies that the book started, and we'll be discussing how life really is in Mexico and for Mexicans, according to some real testimonies, and comparing it to the lives depicted in the novels.
Janine Cummins is the author behind American Dirt. She was born in Spain because her father was a US Marine. However, she was raised in Maryland, in the USA. Despite of this, she calls herself a Puerto Rican because her family has ancestors from both Irish and Puerto Rico. Uh, so she calls herself an Irish Puerto Rican woman who was born in Spain. She is married with an Irishman who was an illegal immigrant in the USA until they got married. And he was the first inspiration to write American Dirt. Nowadays, she lives in New York with two kids and her husband. As I mentioned before, Janine Cummins' family has roots in both Ireland and Puerto Rico, and that can be seen in two of her previous books, uh, which are The Outside Boy and The Crooked Branch, which are historical novels placed in Ireland, both of them. One is about a modern mother living in New York trying to raise her child all by herself, who finds the journey of uh, one of uh, one of her ancestors, who was also a mother, and she finds out about the crimes that happened in her family. And The Outside Boy is about a kid, I think it was an 8 years old kid, uh, who traveled around Ireland um, with his father. Both of these novels are placed in Ireland, um, and by this we can tell that um, Cummins is, um, let's say, she's more comfortable talking about the things she knows or is allowed to write about, because she is actually part Ireland. She has a family that comes from Ireland, so she's technically allowed to write things like this. And then we have A Rip in Heaven, which was her first release as a writer, and is a memoir about a past experience of her life, in which two of her cousins were brutally raped and thrown to a river with with her brother, who was also thrown to a river, not raped, but only thrown to a river, and the only survivor was uh, her brother. And he convinced her to write the the book about this experience based on his story about what happened in that night. So Cummins, we can see that Cummins is close to to the pain that comes with the loss of a family member um, because of crime. In her author's note, Cummins explains that she had to do a very extensive research about Mexico. She traveled to Mexico. She talked with migrants, non-migrants. She tried to spend the longest time in Mexico and with Mexicans to be able to write this novel. And yet she was thoughtful about writing it, because she's not Latin, she's just a descendant, and she's not a descendant of Mexicans, but from Puerto Rican. And so she said she wished that story was written by someone browner, but even so she wrote it because someone told her it was important to shine a light in this topic. So she researched for 4 years and made several drafts that were read by different people from different places before it turned out to before the final piece, which is American Dirt. So she made a very important research for 4 years from both sides of the division, to say somehow, from both the United States and Mexico, and she learned a lot. But still, people think she's not the most suitable person to write about this topic. However, she said she decided to write it anyway because she was allowed to write about whatever she wanted, and she was mostly inspired by her husband, who is an illegal migrant from Ireland. And she also said that it was kind of ridiculous to only be able to write about what you know. So she a quote from a interview. Uh,
American Dirt is about a Mexican woman named Lydia and her young son Luca, who managed to escape the massacre of their family at the hands of a powerful drug cartel, and they embark on a journey to cross the border of Mexico to the United States. Because Lydia doesn't have the proper documentation for her son to board a plane, they have to cross the border illegally. And they do so by boarding the dangerous train La Bestia and then hiring a coyote to help them cross. The novel tackles the issue of Latin American immigrants to the United States, particularly illegal immigrants, and it touches subjects of violence, drugs, abuse, and racism. The novel, as the author mentions, tries to make visible and to humanize immigrants. This novel sparkled a lot of controversies, especially because it's a novel about Mexican immigrants written by a white woman who never experienced illegal immigration. Most of the criticism comes from Latin writers who think works tackling the same issues as American Dirt that are written by Latin writers don't get the same attention as this one. Personally, I think some of the criticism is valid when it comes to things depicted in the novel. I think the novel relies very much on Mexican stereotypes. For example, the use of random Spanish words in the middle of a fully English conversation. The mention of stereotypical Mexican things such as quinceañeras or carne asada are other examples. There is also criticism of the protagonist in that she seems to have a foreign view of her own country. According to Mexican critics, there are obvious things that a middle class and cultural woman like her should know about. For example, that she needs a birth certificate for her son to board a plane, and she doesn't know that. In addition, her reactions to the things happening around her are strange given that she is a Mexican citizen and she should be accustomed to that kind of things. For example, she gets very horrified at the violence happening in her country and the rise of the cartels. Um, I think that's understandable, but for what we've learned of some testimonies of actual Mexicans, Mexican citizens, these kind of things are normal for people like them. So it is weird that she has these reactions in the books. I think the novel negatively portrays Mexico as this horrible, violent place and America as this beautiful and safe and safe place to which all Mexicans wish to escape to, and that's really not it.
In these last slides, I will be reading some testimonies from some friends of mine who are from Mexico. I asked them to tell me how it is to live in Mexico and their experiences with violence and robbery. This one is from Gabriela Manriquez Hernandez. She's 23 years old and she's from Tijuana. In my city, it is common to pagar plazas. Everyone has to pay them, even little independent shops. They make everyone pay, even those who only sell corn, tamales, or fried things outside their houses. A long time ago, my city was one of the worst ones, but it was dangerous only if you had bad luck or if you had something to do with narcos, directly or indirectly. You could see in newspapers, on TV, things such as beheadings, people hanging from bridges, with signs with threats from a narco group to the other, shootings and things like that almost every day. I even heard, when I was a kid, that a woman from my colony was murdered. Murdered. I even heard, when I was a kid, that a woman from my colony was murdered because some bad people had gone searching for a man and ended up killing her because he had just arrived to a neighbor's house to do the cleaning, but those men had the wrong address and ended up getting into the house where she was. Things get heavy when a group of narcos want to take control over some specific zones, and nowadays I feel that everything's okay in my city because some powerful people. This one is from Sofia Amara Melendez Garcia. She's 24 years old and she is from Mexico City. Mexico is one of the most dangerous countries to be a journalist because the narcos and the government are practically the same thing. And if you dare to speak out about it, you end up dead. I studied to be a journalist, and something they told us in the major is that if we wanted to write the truth about policy, we had two roads to take. Taking the chachote, which is briefly from the government, so that we write whatever they want, or writing the truth and having to hide ourselves, waiting to be found. I personally have not experienced anything bad, but one of my classmates back in university works for a newspaper and he was sent to Tijuana. He was there living with his girlfriend. He started writing about what happened in. This one is from Bastiani. She's 20 years old and she used to live in Veracruz and she also lived in Guadalajara. Nowadays she lives in the US. It depends on the place you live in. My dad's family is from Veracruz and that is a very heavy place. Usually when there are problems between narcos, it is because they are fighting for zones where they can do their businesses. Something you learn from living there is that as long as you do not mess with the wrong people, the only reason why you might get attacked is because they mistook you with someone else, because you got in the middle of a shooting, or because you are in the wrong place at the wrong time. They usually do not go around hurting innocents. It is usually because someone owes them money or things like that. In Veracruz, the most dangerous group is called La Letra, because they are so dangerous you could get killed only by saying their names out loud in the streets. They are not narcos, but former policemen, and they kill just for the sake of doing it. I would rather find a narco than one of them, because narcos do not kill just because. The last time I went to Veracruz with my family, we had to take a plane because a van had placed from Jalisco, and the carters from those places were in a fight. We could have passed as targets if they saw us going to Veracruz with a van. This one is from Ana Victoria Esperanza Lugo. She's 21 years old and she is from Aguascalientes. Aguascalientes, my city, is not that violent. There is crime, of course, but not like in other places where you cannot even use earrings without being robbed. But when it comes to drug trafficking and all the smuggling networks around the country, that is another story. Aguascalientes is between two cultures, Jalisco's one and Zacatecas one. A lot of things happen, but nobody knows, because the government wants to hide it, of course. My dad, who was a policeman, quitted his job because he used to tell us that there was a time where he was offered to be a driver of a very important politician who was going to a meeting with a dealer, and later on.
In conclusion, I understand what the author tried to do with this novel. I think everyone should be allowed to write about anything, no matter what race or culture they belong to. But I also think that to write another culture, you need to respect that culture and do the proper research, and not rely on stereotypes and exploitation of that culture. And I don't think the author totally achieves that here. I think she did her research, but as I mentioned before, I think the criticism against her work is valid, and I personally didn't like this novel very much.
My conclusion is that um, the author did kind of a good job with this novel. I enjoyed it, but um, I think there was no need to um, mix Spanish and English. I think it would have been better if the author knew Spanish, or straight up writing it in English. Um, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the plot. I could sympathize with some characters, especially the sisters, Soledad and Rebecca. I think those were um, kind of a good kind of good characters. However, I think I agree with most people, and I think this novel should have been written by a Mexican person who knows how it is to actually live in a place as violent as Mexico.